Heroes Like Us is a series intended at sharing comic book characters from various backgrounds and identities. We won't always get everything right, so feel free to make amendments and corrections in the comments. They're always appreciated. What's not appreciated, however, is any form of hate speech or intolerance, so comments of that nature will be immediately deleted and those users blocked from this channel. This is a place of education and celebration. Welcome to Heroes Like Us, our series where we look at a certain identity and then we talk about comic book characters that have that identity. Today we are looking at Egyptian, and this is a little misleading because I think all of these characters are ancient Egyptian, right? So it taps into that mythology, but they're not necessarily characters that are today from Egypt as the country as we know it. So that's a little disappointing. But we're going to dive into these characters that are culturally from the past Egyptian. There are also characters not on this list that might be living in Egypt or have storylines attached to Egypt but aren't Egyptian in ethnicity. So like Moon Knight, for example, not on this list. So let's start with one of the big ones, and this is the villain from Marvel Comics, Apocalypse. His name is Sabah Nur, and Apocalypse is considered to be one of the first mutants. Not necessarily the first, because there's some other contenders, but one of the first. He was born thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, and he was an outcast because he looked different, he had these weird abilities, people didn't know what to think of him, and so he was a bit of an outcast. Now, Apocalypse is a little confusing because his origin has only recently kind of been explained, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. There are a lot of things that don't necessarily fit or make sense, but the general consensus seems to be that he rose to power as this outcast. He had kind of this wide plethora of mutant abilities, but it's not really sure what his natural abilities are compared to. He encountered a spaceship, a celestial ship, that gave him amplified abilities. And we're not really sure what he was able to do before that moment. So there's a big question over whether Apocalypse is a Omega level mutant. And that term is really relegated to the top of the top people that have unlimited power. We do not know the extent of what they can do. And so they say Apocalypse is clearly an Omega level mutant. But we don't know what he is actually able to do versus what this celestial ship gave him the ability to do, because that is not his mutant ability, those are abilities given to him. Okay, we're getting too deep in the weeds here. So Apocalypse gained these abilities. He can change size and shape, and he can shoot beams, and he is nearly indestructible. He is immortal, so he just never ages, which is why he's been around for thousands of years. He has this obsession with the survival of the fittest, which means only the strong should survive. And so he has this complex for the weak should be culled, humanity should be destroyed, and mutants should rise up, and only the strongest mutants should survive. That's kind of his motivation. Apocalypse has only appeared in live action one time, played by Oscar Isaac in X-Men Apocalypse. Up next on the list, we've got from Marvel Comics, the living Monolith, Ahmet Abdul. This is an Egyptian professor studying kind of archaeology and hieroglyphics, and he realizes that he has this mutant ability to harness energy. So he can kind of take in energy around him and use this. Now, part of this comes from an experiment done to Ahmet, which splices in some DNA from the mutant Havoc. And Havoc kind of also takes in energy and expels that energy. So Ahmet's powers are a bit like that as well. So as the living monolith takes in this energy, he can grow in size and he becomes this kind of giant towering enemy. Now that he has this power, he's also immortal, able to sustain himself off of the energy that he is able to siphon in. He is a villain, and for a while he even donned what we call the Gem of Sidorak, which turns him into the Juggernaut. So for a while, for a short while, the living monolith was the Juggernaut. Up next, we've got two characters from DC Comics that have their roots also in ancient Egypt. And this is confusing because their origins are very convoluted and contradictory. And this is Hawkman and Hawkgirl. Now, there are some stories where Hawkman and Hawkgirl are aliens from a planet where everyone looks like them and they're like police officers. But there's also origin stories that tell that they're from ancient Egypt and they were a prince and princess and they were destined to be together, but they were killed and now regenerate in kind of this endless cycle of reincarnation. There's also some contradiction about their powers because they have a metal called the nth or ninth metal, which allows them to negate gravity, which allows them to fly. So in some stories, their wings aren't real, but they use the wings as a prop, as a suit of sorts, to control how they can fly and negate this gravity. But then in other stories, like where they're from another planet, the wings are natural. So again, in the ancient Egypt story, the wings are not natural. They don't actually have wings, but the wings are a suit that they use to control gravity. I know that is super confusing, but they are featured on the TV show CW's Legends of Tomorrow. So check that out for one version of their origin story. And lastly, for this video, we're going to talk about Black Adam. Now, Black Adam is not actually from Egypt, but he is from a fictional country which is adjacent to and culturally very similar to Egypt, which is called Kahndaq. Now, Black Adam's history and origin is confusing just like the rest of these have been, where in some versions of DC's history, he is empowered by Egyptian gods. So he is the opposite of Shazam, who has these kind of Greek gods, and then he has Egyptian gods, which give him all of these powers and abilities. But in newer versions of the story, there's no longer Egyptian gods. He just gets his powers from an ancient wizard called Shazam, which is how Shazam also gets his powers. In most versions of his history, he is sealed away somewhere, usually in Egypt or Kahndaq, and is released in modern day. And he's usually a villain, sometimes a terrorist, usually very political about Kahndaq and where it stands with the rest of the world. He is said to be featured in the upcoming Shazam movie played by The Rock. So that is it for this video. Are there other characters that are Egyptian in ethnicity that we missed? Let me know in the comments. Hopefully this was interesting. I know this one was super confusing. I don't know why all of these characters happen to have really confusing stories. But thanks for watching. Make sure you check out other episodes of Heroes Like Us, and we'll see you next time.